Thank you. All right.
He died.
So, Krebs is on fire. He mentioned so far it's an assassination attempt. That's true. So here we go. The assassin was immediately arrested. Caught him right on the spot. No search, no doubt, no conspiracy. The assassin, in front of all these witnesses, shot the president twice and yelled, "I am a stalwart, and Arthur is president now." The assassin's name, Charles J. Guiteau. Charles J. Guiteau, who's on your ID sheet.
Wouldn't they have some security by this point?
No, they had none. Matter of fact, I'll give you, that's a good question, Caleb. Do you realize it took the assassination of Robert Kennedy in 1968 for the Secret Service to start protecting presidential candidates? Yeah, I'll tell you a story of that later. It wasn't even a felony to kill the President of the United States until after Kennedy was assassinated. Believe that. It was a felony to threaten to kill the President, but there was no law on the book that it was a felony to kill him. I swear to God.
You actually got it done, you were fine?
Well, yeah, it was interesting.
You just can't talk about it.
Yeah, so moving on. So, in getting into what Mr. Kretz said, which was very good, President Garfield lay near death for 80 days. So he lay near death for 80 days after he was shot. For 80 days he lay near death. Now, how many shots were fired? Two. One bullet just grazed his arm. Not a big deal. Okay? One bullet grazed his arm. The other lodged deep into his back, and the surgeons could not find the bullet. Remember, this is 18 what?
It's like 1880.
In the 1880s, 1881 actually. So, the one bullet that was fired from Guiteau's gun grazed President Garfield's arm. The other one lodged deep in his back, and because of medical technology in the day, they could not find the bullet. Now, they tried and tried and tried to find this bullet, and they even brought in Alexander Graham Bell, who had an electrical device, and he even tried. What's Bell most known for? The invention of the telephone. Well, they even brought in Alexander Graham Bell with this electronic device he had to try to find the bullet.
Was it a metal detector or something like that?
To a point. But they couldn't detect the bullet even with Alexander Graham Bell's invention.
Did it pass through?
Now, during this time, and remember what time of the year was he shot? He was shot on July 2nd, so how hot is it in Washington, D.C.? Very hot. So despite the heat of the summer in Washington, Garfield remained calm. He was fairly cheerful during this process. During these 80 days, they were trying to get this bullet out. Can you imagine suffering for 80 days and everybody doing their best to try to find the bullet because it had to come out? Well, what ended up being his issue? Matter of fact, they moved him, and he had a seaside cottage in New Jersey, and they moved him there during this recovery and trying to figure out this bullet. What got him? Infection. Very good, Wade. Infection got him. Finally, infection set in after 80 days. And he died on September 19, 1881. So after trying to find this bullet and ease his pain for 80 days unsuccessfully, finally infection set in, and President Garfield died on September 19, 1881, and was buried in Cleveland, Ohio.
He probably shouldn't have picked a stalwart as the vice president.
Maybe. Now, so Ben, where are we at? We went from an assassination attempt to a murder. Okay? So now we have an assassination success. So Guiteau, they basically had to wait on him, didn't they, to find out what the condition of the president was going to be. Okay? So Garfield dies on September 19, 1881. He's buried in Cleveland, Ohio. Now the sad thing about this is if this guy would have lived easily if this was today's technology. And even technology maybe 20 or 30 years later after it came about would have saved Garfield without any problem. They'd have found that bullet and taken it out. Because what didn't they have at that time? X-ray or really modern antiseptics or antibiotics. So those things weren't available at the time. So it's really unfortunate because Garfield probably would have lived without much issue, 20 to 30 years later. But that was it at the time. Now, we go back to Charles Guiteau. At his trial, he acted like such a madman that his attorney based his guilt on a reason of what? Insanity. So he basically defended Guiteau with the idea that he's going to be innocent of this crime, by reason of insanity. He's crazy, he didn't know what he was doing. So Guiteau acted like a complete madman. Complete madman. And so his attorney caught that, and he stated in the trial that he should be declared innocent of the shooting by reason of insanity. And the trial lasted 10 weeks, over 2 months. This trial went on with the prosecution and the defense going back and forth, whatever. Okay? So when you have a trial, the trial happens, and then the jury's asked to give a verdict. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And verdicts can happen quickly, or they can happen over a length of time, depending on all the information that was given during the trial. So the trial lasts 10 weeks. So one would assume if the trial lasted 10 weeks, that probably the jury would be out quite a while because of the length of the trial. Actually, it was quite the opposite. Even though the trial lasted 10 weeks, the verdict took less than 1 hour to hand out. Okay, so even though the trial lasted 10 weeks, the verdict only took an hour to hand out. Well, within that hour, the jury convicted Guiteau, and he was sentenced to death. And how did they kill you when you're sentenced to death in 1882? Hanging. So, after just an hour of deliberation, the jury convicted Guiteau of murdering the president, and Guiteau was sentenced to hang, which occurred in 1882. Now, when did Vice President Chester Arthur assume the presidency? After Garfield was shot, or 80 days later when he died?
When he was shot.
No, 80 days later when he died. He became the vice president. He was the vice president who was in charge of running the country, so to speak, although Garfield was certainly coherent enough to make decisions, but it wasn't until after Garfield's death that Vice President Chester Arthur assumed the presidency. Now, let's think about this a little bit. This kind of a little tidbit. Chester Arthur's wife actually died in 1880. So this would be prior to him becoming president. So it was the first time in history we had no first lady during the presidency. So there was no first lady during the Arthur presidency because his wife had died prior to the assassination. So Arthur's wife died in 1880, just prior to Arthur becoming president. So there was no first lady during his presidency. Now, what did we tell you about Vice President Arthur that was kind of interesting? What was he? He was a stalwart, remember? And so he probably, I mean, he felt bad about Garfield being assassinated, but he was a stalwart. He could probably do his own thing and not worry about what Garfield had planned, right? Well, actually, Arthur felt guilty. And why did he feel guilty, and why did he continue Garfield's term and what Garfield wanted to do, including getting rid of the spoils system? Why did he do that? Even though he was just, what?
Because the assassin yelled out that Arthur is the stalwart that day.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very good. Arthur was so embarrassed and felt so bad about the fact that the assassin yelled his name after killing the president that he made his mind up that he would did everything that he believed Garfield would have done, including this getting rid of the spoils system of government, which was kind of a stalwart type thinking. So even though he was a stalwart, he felt so guilty about the assassin yelling his name after shooting Garfield that he went out of his way to fulfill everything he thought Garfield would have done during his presidency, including getting rid of the spoils system, which was something that the stalwarts were in favor of. Okay? So he's an honorable man. However, what did the stalwarts think across the country? He was a traitor. He was a traitor in their minds. They thought sure he would run out and change everything to the stalwart way of thinking, but again, Arthur felt so badly and so guilty that the assassin yelled his name like that he imagined what he thought that Garfield would want to do during his presidency, and he followed it. And obviously it's going to cost him any chance of what?
Re-election.
He'd be elected to his own term. Not re-election, but elected to his own term. Okay? All right. So let's go to the election of 1884. Well, as we mentioned, Arthur really wanted to run for presidency. Now, this is not an uncommon error. You said it, what you thought was right. He wanted to run for re-election. Actually, he wouldn't be running for re-election because he was never elected because he was given the presidency. So he did want to run for his own election. So he really wanted to be the Republican candidate for president. He did. But the stalwarts were so angry at him for being a traitor in their minds by following Garfield's plan that they didn't support his nomination in any way, shape, or form. Any way, shape, or way, whatever. Now, who do you think they nominated? Somebody we already talked about from back. No, quit saying it. Huh? No, James G. Blaine. We talked about him. Where was he from? Maine. Very good. So, the Republican Party nominated James G. Blaine for the presidency. He was on your ID sheet. We talked about him earlier. Now, kind of the interesting thing about this is, remember Arthur was kind of wanting to run for president? Well, he did not know during this time he was vying for the presidency that he had a bad kidney ailment. And that kidney ailment, which, by the way, if you're interested in it, was called the Bright's disease. Anyway, it killed him at the age of 56. So if he would have been elected president, if he'd have got the nomination and been elected president, he wouldn't have lasted hardly any into the term. You know what I mean? So while he was actually vying for the Republican nomination, which he didn't get because he made the stalwarts mad, he had a fatal kidney infection called Bright's disease, and he actually died at the age of 56 in 1886. So even if he was nominated and elected, he would not have lived to serve his own term.
Who did the other Republicans, the half-breeds, nominate?
Well, we'll tell you. Now, well, you're right on top of me. So, as Caleb just alluded to, not all members of the Republican Party were satisfied with James Blaine, right? Many Republicans accused Blaine of using his political influence in securing big favors for big business, which he would be making a nice profit for himself on that. So they kind of accused him of scandal. So because of that unrest within the Republican Party split, and they formed another group called the Mugwumps. Mugwumps. So because of the unrest within the Republican Party, the party split, and Republicans that were unhappy with Blaine's nomination formed a group called the Mugwumps. Not the half-breeds, they're gone now. The Mugwumps. Kind of crazy. So what are the Mugwumps going to do once they get their group together?
Nominate someone?
They're going to nominate somebody. And who are they going to nominate?
Grover Cleveland.
Grover Cleveland, who was the former governor of New York. No, that's not true. I screwed you up. I screwed you up already.
California.
The Mugwumps didn't nominate anyone. The Democrats nominated Grover Cleveland, former governor of New York, for the presidency. I screwed you up a little bit there. So I'll repeat that. Because of the unrest within the Republican Party, the party split, and the Republicans, unhappy with Blaine's nomination, formed a group called the Mugwumps, and then the Democratic Party nominated Grover Cleveland, former governor of New York, for the presidency. Now, what did the Mugwumps threaten to do if things didn't change within the party?
Show people?
No. What would be the worst thing the Mugwumps could do for the party?
Make a new party.
Vote
For the Democrat.
vote for the Democratic candidate. So what the Mugwumps did is they threatened the Republican Party, who nominated James G. Blaine, and said, if you don't make some changes that we're in favor of, we're going to vote for Cleveland. That's what we're going to do. Now, really, realistically, they probably wouldn't have done that, but that's what they threatened they would do. So the Mugwumps said, hey, we're going to protest this nomination. If you don't do some things that we think are right, we're going to cast our vote for the Democratic candidate, Grover Cleveland. But really, would they have done that?
No.
Probably not. Well, something happened on election eve that changed the tide. One of Blaine's closest supporters,
Shot.
nope, he referred publicly, and he called the Democrats rum, Romanism, and rebellion, which is on your ID sheet. So, on election eve, one of Blaine's best supporters stated publicly for many to hear that he considered the Democrats rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Rum, Romanism, and rebellion.
Is that like an insult?
Why would it be? Does that insult anybody in here? Rum, which is alcohol, Romanism, and rebellion means you're a rebeller. Who's Romanism? Who would be offended by that?
Egyptian.
No, would you? Kind Roman somethings.
Catholics.
The Roman Catholics. Very good. That offended the Catholic Party. Unfortunately, for the Republicans, there were a lot of Catholics in the Republican Party. So what did they do when that statement was made by James Blaine's supporter and referred to the party, Democrats?
But wait.
What?
I'm just curious, did really that many people wait till the very last moment to vote?
Yes. What's election eve? It's the day before. You got to wait that. Now listen, I don't want to confuse you. He referred to the Democratic Party as rum, Romanism, and rebellion. Now you're thinking, why would that offend Republicans when he said that to Democrats? Because you still had Roman Catholics that were Republican, right? So he used a Roman Catholic slur to put down the Democrats. They didn't care whether they criticized the Democrats. Who else were they criticizing? All Catholics, whether you're Democrat or Republican. And as a result of that, all the Republican Catholics, all the Democratic Catholics, certainly voted for Cleveland. But the Republican Catholics also voted for Cleveland. Otherwise, it was going to be a pretty close election. Now think about this. Okay? What counts in an election again? Electoral votes. Okay? Now listen, think about this. When all of the Republican Catholics decided they were going to cast their vote for Cleveland, Cleveland wins 219 to 182. You see how they hurt themselves? If Blaine's supporter doesn't make that stupid comment the night before the election, is there a chance that Cleveland gets beat by Blaine? Absolutely. Look how close it was. Okay? So Cleveland wins the election. And this was the first Democratic presidential win in 28 years. Who was the last Democratic president? Here we are. Here's Chester Arthur. Here's Grover Cleveland. Who is the last Democratic president we had? Anybody know? Okay, here we are. Grover Cleveland, Chester Arthur, James Garfield, Rutherford B. Hayes, Ulysses S. Grant, Andrew Johnson, Abraham Lincoln, James Buchanan was the last Democratic president to win an election. Was he Democrat? Johnson, Southern Democrat?
No.
But did he get elected? No, he took over the presidency when Lincoln was assassinated. This is the last Democratic win prior to Cleveland's win. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elections since the last Democratic win. That reminds me of the Masters golf tournament yesterday.
21-year-old won.
Yeah, 21-year-old kid won. He led from start to finish. 4 rounds of the Masters. He led the first round, second round, third round, fourth round. First time since 1976 that somebody led wire to wire. That's when I graduated from high school in 1976. That was a long time ago. How many years ago was that? So anyway, okay? All right, moving on. Important legislation passed under President Cleveland. What's legislation, kids? What's a short word? What's a short word for legislation? Starts with a law. Legislation are laws. So I'm going to tell you about 3 very important laws that were passed during President Cleveland's administration. This first one was really important. What was it? What was the first one? Oh, is it on your sheet? Presidential Succession Act of 1886. Presidential Succession Act of 1886. What didn't we have prior to that? A presidential succession. Okay, so what this law stated, obviously, that if the president and vice president died, because we already knew the succession prior to that, if the president died, who took over? Vice president. But what we didn't have in the books is what would happen if the president and the vice president became dead or disabled. What would be the succession to the office? That's why it was put in. It wasn't put in because we didn't know who would succeed the president. We knew that. But then they thought, holy smokes, we've had a couple of assassinations here. what would happen if the vice president had some problems. So the Presidential Succession Act of 1886 was a law that stated if both the president and the vice president died or became disabled, who would succeed to the presidency? What do you think the succession was?
Speaker of the House.
Well, don't get that specific. Cabinet members in order in which their offices were created. That's how it is now. Okay? But that's how it was then. So, what was the first cabinet that was created? Remember?
Jefferson.
Department of State, Department of the Treasury, Department of War. That's how they were first set up. So when this Succession Act came up in 1886, the succession after the Vice President was cabinet members in the order in which their offices were created, which means at that time, who was going to be the new president? Secretary of State. The order right now is the Speaker of the House.
And the Secretary of State?
No,
What happens if like
Yeah.
all of them die?
Oh, it just goes
Would
down.
you get down to like the
Well,
secretary?
I don't have it on
or
top of my head, but if you want to look that up, you could get the presidential succession all the way down.
well, just say they're all flying in a plane and it goes down.
Could happen, then there's a
They
specific
wouldn't be
order.
that stupid.
Yep, they don't do that,
Well,
that's
that's a good
exactly right.
point.
What's that?
How did they not figure that out after Lincoln's assassination? Because they tried to assassinate the vice president and speaker.
I don't know, you just would think, you wondered, it took till 1886 to get that figured out, it's a good question. Okay, here's the next law. The Electoral Count Act of 1887, what do you think that had to do with?
Electoral counting.
Well, what happened that caused some problems?
There was a
They're gonna
tie.
fix. What?
There was a tie.
No, what happened back in one election in which Rutherford B. Hayes was given the presidency? Remember, 4 states did what? Sent in 2 sets returns. So this act, the Electoral Count Act of 1887, provided a solution if a state sent in more than